So over the last couple of years, we've seen really quite ambitious programs to make open data on budgets, public finances, and other aspects of our societies available. And sometimes we underestimate how ambitious those programs have been. We're taking something that previously has been managed through periodic processes of accounting and trying to represent the state of the world with respect to how public finances are in almost real time. And along that path, we've hit challenges, but we've also got lots of promising practice emerging. Some of the early claims about what open financial data would do, I think, were perhaps misplaced. We had in the United Kingdom this discourse about the armchair auditor, the idea that armies of armchair auditors, hundreds of people, would pick up public budget data and comb through it for information, forgetting that audit and that kind of activity is a skilled activity that you've got to be really motivated to do. So people do look at budget data when they've got an issue that they care about and they want to check up on, but they don't necessarily comb through it from a neutral point of view, looking for gains in state efficiency. That kind of activity is the preserve of non-governmental organisations, public bodies themselves, and spend analytics companies or other institutions who exist. And I think looking at how those organisations who existed before we had published detailed open data on budgets, looking at how they've changed their practices, is a really important space to see both the potential of this data and the challenges to its use. Because what we learnt in work on open data in developing countries, the Web Foundation's Open Data in Developing Countries research program, which I was involved in coordinating, what we found there was many organisations struggled to transition from the current ways they're analysing budgets by looking at documents, phoning up government officials, building on their trusted relationships. They struggled to transition from that to using data because in the first year that data is published, its quality might not be great, or they might not trust that it's reliable and going to be published ongoing into the future. So there are some real kind of challenges to get over before widespread use happens across different organisations. However, if we are to look at three areas, I think, where there's really interesting practice taking place in financial data, one would be in helping organisations plan their activities better. So we see this particularly in areas such as international aid, where the International Aid Transparency Initiative for 5 years has been pushing the publication of detailed project level information on financial flows. And that data is now getting to the stage where donors can look at what others are planning on funding and can think about coordinating their activities better together using that data for coordination and planning purposes. I think we're also seeing interesting activity emerging around public contracting with things like the open contracting data standard that's saying let's get beyond high-level budget figures down to the contracts through which public finances are being spent, because this makes stuff much closer to the ground, closer to people's day-to-day experience. The difficulty of budget numbers or large spending numbers is they're aggregate, they're distant from citizens' lives, whereas seeing the contract that spends that budget on the local school, the local road, connects this data much more to people's experiences and is relevant to both the public sector, the private sector, and citizens themselves. The last interesting impact I'm going to mention in the last few seconds is something we observed from a case study of public budgets in Brazil in the Open Data in Developing Countries project, where the act of releasing data and seeing citizen groups and university groups try and geocode that data led to government rethinking what data it collected, shifting from maybe an accounting model of data collection to one that was much more around engaging citizens with the budgeting and spending process, collecting geodata for themselves. So this ripple effect, not only about data use, but also about changing how data's collected and managed, is one of the really interesting impacts we're seeing. And I'll stop there.